I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education for Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. Board members may attend and participate in board meetings by electronic means in accordance with BVSD policy BMEA and state law. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Here.
Medler,
Here.
Niznik,
Here.
Quinlan Aweda,
Here.
Rajpal,
Here.
Sargent,
Here.
Unger. Thank you.
Now I'd like to turn it over to Board Member Quinlan Aweda to read our land acknowledgement this morning.
Boulder Valley School District resides and operates on land that is the ancestral homeland and unjustly and illegally taken territory of the Ute, Puebloan, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Apache, Navajo, and 48 other tribal nations historically tied to this land, who have called this land home since time immemorial. We acknowledge the atrocities committed here, including the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate the indigenous inhabitants from their homeland, supported by the policies of the United States government. BVSD is aware of the many indigenous peoples, past and present, and their dignified nations and cultures who care for the land with strength and resilience. BVSD recognizes the histories of the land in Colorado and the survival of the many nations that carry their oral traditions into the present. It is BVSD's responsibility to educate ourselves, our communities, and our students so that we can embrace the wisdom and knowledge of indigenous peoples and actively stand together to address injustices. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm and honor the history, wisdom, oral traditions, and resilience of indigenous people, and recognize the responsibility to care for and appreciate this land together.
Thank you, Elena. I'd like to remind everyone that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're glad to have you observe and participate in our meetings. At this time, I would like to call for a brief moment of silence in recognition of the school shooting that occurred yesterday, the lives lost, and the injuries, both physical and mental, incurred. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, that will no longer become a reality or be a reality for our students and our staff. At this time, I'd like to see if there's a motion to approve today's agenda. So moved by Kitty, seconded by Beth. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Aweda,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sargent,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
I'd like to make a note that it is 9:04 and Board Member Unger just arrived. Thank you. Motion passes.
As indicated on the agenda for this morning, our first order of business is for the board to convene an executive session. Do I have a motion for this? Jorge? Seconded, yeah.
I, Jorge Chavez, make a motion pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024F to convene an executive session to discuss personnel matters regarding the superintendent's evaluation process, specifically the superintendent's mid-year evaluation, and pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024B to confer with an attorney to receive legal advice on the Grove Elementary at Belle Swan Charter School application process.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kitty. Laura, can you please call the roll?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oida,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Board members, we will now convene in the Glacier Room. We will now begin the prioritization, our first information for this evening, which is the look at the BVSC's qualitative UIP strategic plan implementation metrics and data. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Anderson for introductions.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal, board members. It's great to see you all this morning for our third in our sessions of deep dive work session around strategic plan and our UIP. We're joined with a bunch of new members from our team today. We have Dr. De La Cruz and Chris Brecht, as you are familiar with. We also have Joel Rivera and Chris Fiedler, who are our administrators for our strategic plan support teams, which is a new process and support that we're providing this year as a reminder to begin to replicate some of the supports that we've provided to our high support schools all throughout the district and create the coherence and consistency that research will and our own performance will tell us is what we need to continue to close achievement and opportunity gaps. And so excited to have everybody here today. We've got some time built in to have some conversation, a little more qualitative. I know that we've done a lot of quantitative deep dives. We'll do a little more qualitative work today. We're scheduled to go for about an hour. And then after that, we're going to be turning to some policy work. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Dr. De La Cruz. Laura.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Good morning, President Rajpal, members of the board. And Jonathan Dings is on his way to join us as well, because he'll be supporting the conversation this morning. So as the board knows, in August and October, we had the opportunity to be at this table and let you know and to provide feedback about the Altogether for All Students strategic plan, as well as our UIP, strategic objectives, leading measures, and the dashboards being built. And as far as data cycles go, as Dr. Anderson indicated, we don't have new student outcomes to share today because of the point where we are in the school year. And Claire has been working diligently on getting all dashboards up and ready so that next time we're at the table with you, we'll have updates to share there. We're also really glad to have our strategic plan support team members in the room, and also to have our strategic plan support team administrators at the table with us, as Dr. Anderson said, since we'll be talking about the work happening in cohort 1 and beginning to forecast the work for cohort 2 as well. And 2 out of 3 of our strategic plan support team specialists are also in the room in the audience, and we'll be highlighting their work as well. So the updates that we'll include today are focused on the strategic plan and the UIP implementation, as well as a scorecard that we've developed that we'll be talking with you more about, that relays metrics and leading indicators. And we're also really pleased, as I said, to provide additional information about the work of our strategic plan support team, inclusive of the overall structure of the support and the plan and the day-to-day work in schools. And then we'll be pausing for a question and answer opportunity with Chris and Joel. What we'll be sharing today is, as Dr. Anderson said, really more qualitative than quantitative. We have some information to share in regards to each of the 4 strategic objectives that we're all becoming very familiar with: no limits, next best step, define the destination, and valued and included. And as always, we'll be pausing along the way. We definitely invite the board to ask questions and to be in conversation about the content as we go. Before we dive into the scorecard and provide more context, I do want to mention that there's even a different kind of scorecard, more or less, that I've had the pleasure of keeping mental notes on. And this is coming through school visits. And I've been in many classrooms first semester, and I'm just incredibly pleased to share that I've seen lots of evidence that our consistency, and our co-parents and really staying the course with our strategic plan is paying off. Not only our student outcomes lining up to where we want them to be, but in all the important artifacts that we want to see in classrooms, including practices, visual evidence, teaching and learning, students really engaged and having agency around their learning is incredibly pleasing to see, as well as use of curricular materials, use of materials and resources in the instructional playbook, seeing the instructional model come to life, and also seeing the outcomes of data-driven instruction informing what's happening in school. So as you can imagine, I was really excited to share that with you because it's, they say it takes about 3 to 5 years of consistency in expectations and leadership to really see the outcomes of that. And I would say we're really seeing that in classrooms now. So we're building capacity in our schools and in our classrooms and our educators in a variety of ways, from our schools team and our executive directors to our academics department to our strategic plan support team. And in fact, something new is happening today. We have a teacher leader cohort that's meeting right next door. It's called Teacher to Teacher, and it's another opportunity for some lead teachers to help build capacity across our system that I'm sure I'll be sharing more with you about as it develops. And all of these align directly to the All Together for All Students strategic plan. So on to the scorecard. We know that we have our strategic plan. We know we have our UIP, and these can be accessed online and on the CDE website. And we have our public metrics dashboard. We have new dashboards being built. But we also know that it can be helpful just to have a snapshot of the work that we're doing and what we're tracking. That's really easy to access visually and to understand. So in the spirit of that, we developed a simple scorecard with 2 elements: the outcomes that we're aiming for in terms of student outcomes and the leading indicators that we're monitoring in the adult behaviors that will lead to the student outcomes that we're also tracking. So we're going to share that scorecard with you today. Chris Breck will walk us through it, and Jonathan will provide some context and explanation about the data, such as the targets for improvement and the baselines. And with that, I'll pass it over to Chris and Jonathan.
Good morning, Board President Rajpal, members of the board. Thank you again for having us. As Dr. De La Cruz said, I'm just going to orient us to this visual. This scorecard is new, but the targets within it and the action steps within it are not. They are going to mirror what you see within our district unified improvement plan. And really, the way that we wanted to lay this out is a very easily accessible, quick to reference on where we are making progress within our strategic plan and specifically the targets that are in the UIP. So you'll notice that we aligned it based off of our 4 key objectives. So this first section here under no limits, you'll see that we have our 24-25 targets, both around achievement and growth. They are broken out based off of the different percentage gains for specific groups. Just as we outline within our district UIP, we've listed out those groups there in parentheses so you can see those. And then as you move to the right across the scorecard, you'll see that we have a status indicator there. That can change from gray to when we do not have data available to yellow where it's in progress, and then a green with a check mark through it as we start to achieve those targets. Also, you'll see that when we have things that have a gray indicator there, you'll see when we anticipate having that data available and when we can update this for you. All the way to the right is where we have links to the specific baseline data. And when you look through that, we highlight very specifically the baseline data that we are referencing so that you can see both the targets for year 1 as well as the targets for year 2. Then at the bottom, we have, as Dr. De La Cruz mentioned, our leading indicators there. These also, as a part of the action steps within our district unified improvement plan, the unified improvement plan is a 2-year plan. So I wanted to make sure that you were able to see that the leading indicators across those 2 years, but we will update them and check those boxes as the work is embedded into our system, and know that if they're not checked, that is something that we are continuing to work on throughout the course of this UIP.
If I could just make a comment, Chris, I just really love how we have our outcomes aligned with our tactics and our results all in one place to see, where you're not having to shuffle through, multiple documents to figure out, are we doing what we said we'd do? And is it working in the ways that we'd hoped it would?
Yeah, and that was exactly our goal, because we know that, as you indicated, these are easy to access and navigate. And while everything is available through the CDE website, it's definitely more time intensive and cumbersome to track that way, although anyone can. This might be a great opportunity to pause for questions or comments. And also I want to invite Jonathan, when the time is appropriate, to talk to us about the targets and the baselines.
Thanks for this. And piggybacking on what Dr. Anderson said, I think it's great to have the leading indicators along with the target. And I like the baseline data being included as well, because it's nice to see where we are coming from as we're moving ahead. One point of feedback: yellow and green make sense for stoplights. The gray does not necessarily make sense. And so I just wonder if there's somewhere where you can indicate what the colors mean for the status, like gray means yellow means red means, just so if the public as they're viewing our documents is crystal clear on what the color indicators mean.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Absolutely.
Board members, questions, comments for?
So at this time, before we move forward, well, I suppose, Chris, you could also just skim through that we have one of these for each of the 4
Mhm.
objectives, and then give Jonathan an opportunity to talk about baselines and targets.
Yep. So again, on these slides that you have available to you, we broke it out. This is for the next best step. We have that target. We do have some in-progress data available for you to look at there, as well as the 3 leading indicators that we're tracking. Similarly, for define the destination. And then finally, for valued and included. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Diggs.
President Rajpal, members of the board, Dr. Anderson. So the manner in which targets were set is a manner that's fairly consistent with how we've done it in the past, in that we've taken an ambitious target, right? Something that if we had attained it, it would reflect a real achievement. And we've divided the targets up into setting higher targets for groups that are not achieving as high or growing as well, or who have rates of something positive, like a work-related experience that aren't as high as other groups, or in the case of metrics around something negative, like an out-of-school suspension, the group that has the higher percentage of that. We set more ambitious targets for the groups where we want to see gaps close, and we set what is still an ambitious target for what that would mean overall for other groups in particular. I'm happy to walk through these, but our basic logic has been to focus on groups in achievement where we have a big enough N, big enough minimum size, and in terms of what we're looking at that way. I don't know if it's useful for me to say more about this, or it looks like there's a hand up on the queue.
Alex?
Yeah, thank you. What are the ends that we're currently dealing with out-of-school suspensions or by school? I guess I raise the issue because in the long run, dealing with a 0.25% point decrease, we're dealing with pretty small decreases in order to achieve the goals. And it would help me understand what the N is. And that leads back to me. Well, I mean, that's my first question.
Great. So as far as the idea of about a 0.25% being a big enough amount, given that we're currently, we were in the last year, in the baseline year that we set, 1.3% of students overall received an out of school suspension. This idea about a 0.25% is that it makes up a very big fraction of that 1.3, right? It's roughly 19% of that amount. So while the target isn't a big number, the amount we're working from to basically start with is that one. And so as far as ends go, it's the ends of the whole student body, right? So we can pose it that way. But I think as far as given that there's been a certain level of system change in advance of this, right? This isn't our first year of looking at out of school suspensions. This amount represents something that's worthwhile and is half the reduction that we're aiming for in groups that have suspension percentages, out of school suspension percentages of 2.5% to almost 3.
If I can, I think in the long run, this is where I'm glad to see the restorative practices added as a measure, because I do think, given the changes the district made in previous years on out of school suspension, we're dealing with the tapering end of the curve. And that I ask about the end because it would be good to know how many kids we're talking about it would take to achieve the goal. So is that like if we got 20 less suspensions, we'd achieve it, or 5? And that for me might bring some more attention to the other things like the effectiveness of the restorative justice implementation. So I still understand that that's a significant and important goal to pursue. My concern over time is that we may be dealing with the tail end of a goal that isn't driving as much substantive change that we might get if we addressed some other aspect of our discipline system. And that's where having the ends and stuff and understanding it at a school level basis might comfort me that we are not measuring something down into infinitum when we get to the 0.25% goal.
Yeah. So the baseline of 1.33% was 371 students who had one or more out of school suspensions. So when we're reducing that by about 1/5, right? We're talking about 70 students, about.
And potentially 10 students if all our high schools were the same. 8 to 10 students not getting an out of school suspension is our goal, which is significant. And those are real kids with real things going on. I'm just wondering how that relates to other numbers of kids involved in our disciplinary system that affect them, and perhaps in disproportionate or inappropriate ways. Like, so how many other, what's the numbers of some of these things would help me understand the scale of it. But I'm not saying those need to be in the dashboard. I'm bringing that forward as a board member, wondering about our, like the next level of this. Like, okay, what happens at a school like Fairview? Are we talking about having 15 less out of school suspensions? And are there other aspects of the discipline that might be more impactful?
Lelania, then Beth.
I don't know if this is working. It's in and out. On the restorative practices, I'll echo what Alex said. I'm glad to see it's on there and that we don't just have that one metric of out of school suspensions. And I think the next iteration that I'd like to see, that I would hope for in restorative practices would be targeted toward recidivism, because that's what restorative practices, while they're there to help in the moment, they really are there to prevent recidivism. So I love to see the increase in the practice being used, but I'd like to see if it's impacting recidivism.
I had this exact same conversation with our team, and learned something. I think that's really important for us to know. Implementing restorative practices is difficult. It takes time, and it's kind of like implementing MTSS. in the sense that there's a journey to get to where you just started, to where it's culturally embedded and reliable and systemic. And to the extent that until we get to a place where we have a mass of schools that are implementing our restorative practices in the ways that we would have hoped, I think at that point is when we would look to recidivism. When we talked to our team and we pushed on this a little bit, the hesitation is if we start to look at recidivism as the goal of the restorative practices, yet we haven't reached where we want to with restorative practices, it could give you a false negative that could potentially push energies to stop doing something we know is good and right. So with you, hear that. And I do think that as we think about how do we assess how restorative practices is going, that we could use a similar methodology that we've used over time with MTSS, where there's a rubric and we begin to start to assess and understand where schools are in the implementation of that, and then get to recidivism. But ask the same question. So yeah, no, I totally understand your point.
Beth and Kitty?
I was going to take us to something different. Is your thing about recidivism? Let's go to that.
Well, it's not exactly about recidivism, but so I think I'm hearing you say that restorative practices are not being universally applied. Is that correct? Or am I misunderstanding you?
No, I think the expectation is universal, and the implementation is at different stages at different schools. I would say that to the extent that you would then say, look, we're doing this exactly the way we want it. Let's see if we're seeing recidivism because we have restorative practices the way we want it, which should reduce recidivism. So I think just schools are at different places with the implementation of restorative practices. The expectations are set, but all of these things, because we're not just looking at one data point, we're looking at multiple data points around a big idea, that folks know and understand the importance and the promise of restorative practices to be able to reduce the recidivism and ultimately the suspensions. But if you were to say to me, Rob, or do we have restorative practices at every one of our sites exactly the way they want it? The answer to that is no. Nor should we expect that. To Laura's point, 3 to 5 years really of working through things. It will get, and some folks are getting better at it than others. And so we're working on that and working on the information on that. And so like I shared, I think the next step would be for us to assess how deep the implementation is at our certain sites. And that's something we can report out to you all at a different time.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Jorge, and then we'll go back to Beth.
Yeah, just a real quick point. I appreciate Dr. Anderson's point about this being a larger discussion about what the school climate looks like and what the implementation looks like, because the restorative practices don't work without the trust and without that sense of engagement and feeling part of that community. So I think it's part of a larger conversation about the ways in which we're kind of addressing the school climate, the sense of belonging, to really reduce the number of incidents to begin with before we look at recidivism. So I think it's making sure that our implementation of our suspension and disciplinary models are fair and that they're being applied correctly. And so I think the implementation part for this one is really critical before we start to see things on the back end and just reducing the numbers. So I appreciate that focus on the conversation.
Well said. Perfect closure. And I want to transition us a little bit. I really appreciate this conversation. I'm trying to digest this as any member of the public might, and I wanted to ask a couple questions about the next best steps section. I clicked, it's the only one of our sections that has the status of yellow. And so I was clicking it to understand what might have changed. So just walk me through what we did to move the needle under that section and how I would know what we did, but using this scorecard. So like I clicked on, I look at this, I'm like, okay, proportionality in special education. Okay, that's yellow. Okay, great. Let me see what the district's done to move the needle. And so I clicked on next best step baseline, right? Mm-hmm. And I can see that we have our targets, But for me, it brings up the question of like, okay, so clearly the district did something to move the needle, but I'm not entirely sure what was done. Does that make sense? So I'm just trying to understand what has happened to make it yellow and not gray.
Questions about special ed.
So let me give half an answer and then we'll let Chris give the other half. So because we have some actual data there that we can show, we attempted to put some level of judgment on it. And when we have a couple metrics going not the way we want, and we have one being about level and the other going the way we want, but being complicated because there's been a change in the way data is gathered around managed in a certain way around free and reduced lunch. I think a color coding that wasn't positive, great, everything's good, was going to fit. But I think a color coding of red that we're concerned about everything wasn't the right thing either. If we had more color shades to work with, I guess this would be a little on the oranger side of yellow. But I think your question also is about what was done.
Yeah, so great question. And I think to Jonathan's point, we actually, when we were playing with the scorecard, it was, do we want to try to indicate some sort of percentage of things that are our progress towards that goal? And that became, I think, confusing for the visual, right? In terms of what we've done, I think an added focus that we've had all the way from the MTSS process all the way up, that has been multiple years in the making, right? So even though we are very specific within the district UIP and the action steps that we've taken that you see listed there below, this has been an ongoing focus around the support of MTSS and the identification of students and ensuring that we have the universal supports in place. So I think we're seeing the benefits of that as well. I think if you were to look at this and we had the data available, you would see a yellow across multiple areas of that, showing that we have progress in different areas. It's just a matter of the data not being available to provide current.
And just to flesh that out a little bit more, our MTSS team, as well as our special education team members, consult pretty intentionally with schools around identification, potential identification, how the MTSS process is engaged when considering the path for students and what they need. And so we're seeing the dial shift a little bit with those kinds of consultations.
I love all of it. My question really is more just, I'm more savvy because I'm a board member, right? Like I know all the great work we're doing with MTSS and all of that. My concern or my point would be, how if I am a person in the community, do I know that we've done this great work with MTSS? How do I really understand that that's what's moving the needle? I wouldn't get that from looking at this. I would look at this and be like, okay, so they've done something to improve proportionality in special education. I'm not entirely sure what's happened. I see that it's yellow. I would want to know what happened. That's why I asked that question. So I don't know if we don't want to put I understand why we don't want to put a check mark because we're not like arrived.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? I just want to make sure that there's a real connection between progress and people being able to understand, oh, this is specifically what they're doing to make that progress. For me, this doesn't draw that line. Does that make sense?
I think it's a little tricky. I hear what you're saying. I don't know that there's a direct correlation with one strategy and the progress. And listen, on this indicator, right? I think there are folks who are on both sides of this issue. There are some folks who have come to us and said, you've made it too hard for my kid to be able to get into special education services, right? And on the other hand, we don't want these things to be disproportionate, that we owe it to kids in their general ed classrooms to provide the tier 2 interventions and instruction necessary for them to be able to learn and succeed. So, I mean, I think that there's been process changes that have been made, Beth. I think that MTSS is being deeper implemented. I think that our tier 1 instruction is getting better with our instructional model and the things that we're doing. So it's hard to just say if we did this one thing and it happened there. I do though think that as we begin to make a more sophisticated scorecard, there could be a narrative of the work that's happened and some success stories to that, where this could be a launching point, maybe where if you click the icon on Next Best or something like that, maybe that's a potential improvement over time. It's just, I think you'd have to have some narrative there, and it would be it's, like a lot of the things, it's the combination of efforts that creates the improvement. It's not do this, that happens.
And just to piggyback there, I actually think if, for a lot of our public and our stakeholders, any of the language that we put in, if they are not living this, if they don't have a student on an IEP, or if I've not, some of it might not make any sense at all. So some of the narrative might actually make things more complicated and create more misunderstanding. Like MTSS is hard to unpack for people in education. It's hard for those, like, for if you aren't aware, to also unpack that too. So I think there definitely would be a balance on any narrative, because the work is complex and there's a lot of different levers that are being pulled. So I'm going to go Jorge, Kitty, Alex, unless Beth, you have a follow-up.
I think I get Beth's confusion a little bit because it's saying yellow, we're making some progress, but none of the lead indicators are marked off. And so it's confusing and saying, okay, so which is it? It can be both. But then you have some data there. It looks like there was progress in terms of IEP percentage reductions for free and reduced lunch. And is that why why it's yellow? But I can see why that might be confusing if you're just coming going, okay, nothing's marked off. We're not kind of data till the end of the year for next year, but then why is it yellow? I think that's the point you were trying to make.
Yes.
Which I kind of get.
I'm hearing that input as a potential consideration of what kind of markers might we consider besides just a check mark to indicate we're making some progress in some areas, and or what's a very minimal, not a narrative, but a very minimal explainer about where that improvement's coming from.
So I'm a little bit confused by the way this is presented, because I didn't realize that under, in the narrative of the proportionality in special ed, where it says respective groups make up and then the numbers, I thought that was saying what it is now, but that's the goal, correct?
The numbers are current percentages.
Okay.
The numbers in the narrative, the current percentages of students with IEPs.
Okay.
The numbers in the column is the current percentage of each of these subgroups of the students on IEPs.
Okay, so the respective groups make up, that's not the goal, that's the reality.
Yeah, that's where the data is.
Okay.
So so our Black students make up 1.9% of our,
That's the target. Yeah.
that's
What-
the
what-
target.
Yes.
Okay,
That's the
that's what's
target.
confusing. Is this the
To make movement to be towards proportionate, that would be the goal.
okay,
Uh,
that's not
I
clear.
think we're looking at two different things. Are you?
I don't think we are.
I believe what Kitty is referring to. Can you go on the screen to the?
Yeah, where it says proportionality in
Next best
special education, that's what I'm looking at.
Next slide.
Under
please.
next best steps.
Is it the right slide?
Go to the next slide, please.
And so the language, Jonathan, that Kitty is asking about is respective groups make up 1.9, 28.3, 15.6, and 40.1% of students with IEPs.
Right. The intended meaning of that language is that's the target, and it's under a column which we can't see because we're on the third or fourth page, right? That says the 24-25 goal or target. Sorry. So that this is, and I totally agree, we can improve the wording of this so it's not as confusing. But the narrative is the target, and the teeny print in the column is the current data.
So then when you click on the next best steps baseline,
Then that will get you to a chart that has the baseline data and the target, but not the current data.
okay,
So I'm working to think of this as a companion to a dashboard that was the topic of our last work session that will be launched soon. trying to figure on how we get the right level of making it simple enough so it can be accessed, succinct enough that it can be looked at on a page, yet also not confuse people.
So how did these numbers, we're looking at District Spring 2024 baseline and going down 2.5, 2.9, 2.6, and so on. How did those relate to the numbers back on the previous document at 2.4, 31.4, 16.4?
You'll want to go to the next best step tab of the Google sheet, and then the numbers will line up for the targets.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see those at the bottom there. That's why I'm confused. So then what does okay, I don't know how to get back to what the other page was, or what the first thing I was looking at. That's not it. What was that? No, oh, no, okay. No, that's not it. No, that's a different one altogether. No, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't understand that then.
Those are different measures. That's a disproportionate use of school suspension.
Right. That's why I was saying that's not the same thing. Yeah, I'm just confused.
I think what might be a little confusing is that some of these will have, because will be a live dashboard, point in time, like our current we had a baseline, this is our current status, and then we have our targets that are in the future. But because not all indicators have a currently updated metric, I think that's where it gets confusing of like where we started, where we are, where we're headed. And I think maybe that's some of the confusion on this particular one, because it is our only one with that point in time data.
And we have a few other things to go through, and I want to make sure that you all have time. And I know Alex has a question. We have some work to do on this to create some of the clarity, and we can follow up with any individual board members who want to walk through that. And Nicole, to your point, as population shifts change, any point in time, if more kids enroll, less kids enroll, some of these things can get impacted potentially not by the things we're doing, but by just the nature of how enrollment runs, which is sometimes why it's hard to give N goals versus percentage goals. So yeah, I mean, the more precise we get, the more complicated that these things can be, but it also is clear on what we're actually doing and trying to do.
Alex, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I have a couple pieces of feedback and a question. I mean, I do think a return button, once you get into the Excel table, I don't know how to get back to the original document either. So having a return button everywhere would be really helpful. In terms of the presentation for the clarity, I would really link your numbers in the narrative to the group rather than using the respective groups and then people have to go back and figure out what the order is to attach things to one another. But to the discussion we just had, really agree with Nicole. If we look at the next best steps data on the stuff, it would be really good, I think, to somehow have someone look at it and understand it better. If you included, like, what is the proportion of the students of that type? Why is that the baseline? Or what's the disproportionality? So without knowing what the proportion of students that Black students are, then you can't really know. And if you add some more columns so that you have proportion of overall enrollment and then proportion of IEPs, then bingo, suddenly the disproportionality makes sense. Or likewise, you could do it if gaps, what we're talking about, you need to make sure to include the comparison group. So as long as we're doing spreadsheets and we have the data and we're dealing with someone who wants to go look at a spreadsheet, my bias would be towards including the data that makes it more intuitive for the user. And that includes showing the proportion of Black or Hispanic students and or showing the proportion of students that aren't Black or Hispanic. Otherwise, you're just dealing with the numbers and you can't really intuitively understand it. And then I don't want to lose it from the last piece. And the discussion of restorative versus the percent of kids getting restorative practices versus recidivism. I would just make the point, that on strategic plans, I think we really are looking for the outcome goals that motivate, incentivize people to move forward and do the process things. And I understand that we have a lot of work to get a lot of process done. And so what that makes sense to me of why we would have the restorative goal in the strategic plan now. But I would say I agree with Lenia that maybe adding the recidivism goal is better to have it in addition so that we know the end goal so that we can motivate some people in schools to know, hey, you got to get your recidivism down. Let's do the restorative justice, and the board's watching your recidivism as well. So I would kind of vote for including a real outcome goal rather than using a process goal like the percent of restorative justice in place of the recidivism that the restorative justice is trying to get to. Sorry, I'm a little late on that one, but just wanted to get that out there.
Dr. Anderson.
I appreciate that feedback. And I hear what you're saying around the recidivism. I would say that when I've seen efforts to reduce disproportionate discipline fail across the country, right? It is because there's a hard line on the numbers without the culture shift and the other practices. Like in a lot of places, the strategic plan would be reduce suspensions. And then what happens is all the same things happen, and then schools get the message, I can't suspend kids. And your suspensions go down, and then chaos goes up in schools because there isn't that level. I think that that's the watch out on that piece, to just deal with those things individually. I hear what you're saying, Alex, on, accountability really comes from hard numbers and long-term outcomes. And also long-term improvement comes from shifting that culture as well. I would hate for folks to begin to conclude that restorative practices doesn't work because you have recidivism. And I think that was the cautionary tale as we started to dig into this. We can continue to look at this and really appreciate the feedback on the proportionality in special education. I think that we've got caught up in the federal designation of disproportionality as a goal versus more comprehensive look at disproportionality, which is what Alex was kind of referring to on, if something's disproportionate, and if you don't put in context that if 5 kids move, then you're not disproportionate anymore, then, what's actually happening.
Thanks for your work on these scorecards. For the sake of time, was there anything else, or should we move on to strategic plan support teams?
This is really helpful feedback. We're definitely going to spend time debriefing. We're all taking notes on the input, and we'll make those modifications as where they fit and bring them back to the board next time we're together. And we're ready, if you are, to move on to talking more about the strategic plan support teams in schools, which is a very innovative step that we are taking. Speaking of really fleshing out leading indicators, the work in our schools in cohort 1 is in full swing with 90-day plans in action, progress and data-driven instruction, MTSS, standards-based instruction. We've worked really closely with the SPST teams we meet with them regularly. We discuss progress in schools, as well as what kind of support is needed in schools, and how that's going, how it's being deployed, how it's being carried out, as we strive toward elevating the school experience through the strategic plan support teams. So heading to the next slide, as the board recalls, the first cohort of schools is comprised of the 10 schools that you will see in a moment on the screen. Yep. Yes, these 10 schools. And I won't name them for you. We've definitely talked about these schools with you over time. And as since we have our strategic plan support team here today, Chris and I are just going to share a little bit about the structure. Let's go back to the structure. There we go. So we have on the right side, you see the structure. We have our strategic plan support team with each having a caseload of schools, and that's made up Each team is made up of a strategic plan administrator. They are at the table with us today. And the intention has been to have an instruction behavior coach and a data-driven instruction coach for each of those teams. We have had difficulty with 3 attempts now in hiring a second instruction behavior coach. So we are being agile in how we're supporting schools. And this is driving us to be even more specific about a deployment dashboard that we're meeting with the team about this week regarding making sure that we're being very precise about what schools need what support. And our goal is to have 10 schools engaged in being a strategic plan support team cohort every year. Is there anything more you want to add to that, Chris?
No, I think that sums up the work that we've had. We've had a lot of celebrations so far, I think, with the implementation of this. As we started a little bit later, we're going to have the opportunity to start sooner with our cohort 2 schools. So there's going to be a transition period where we'll be able to launch in some of that planning ahead of schedule, which is going to be, I think, really beneficial for those who have the benefit of being in cohort 2. Even with the time in the way that it was, I think we have some great celebrations with the current work that we're having in the 10 schools of cohort 1. And Chris and Joel, I'm sure will be able to share some specific examples of that as well.
And so just a refresher, the role of the data and instruction specialist is what you see here, really to co-facilitate data-driven instruction MTSS meetings as needed, to provide professional learning strategies, resources, to coach and support and model for teachers as requested, and to really support the development of and the carrying out of the 90-day plan. And the role of the behavior and instruction specialist is very similar, but really focused on supporting, modeling, coaching around how to best approach and address bringing out the very best in our students in terms of their behavior and ability to attend in class. And so again, we have 2 of our 3 team members in the audience today. Jane and Shelby are here, and we so appreciate their work. I'm sorry, Jane is not here. Laura and Shelby are here. Jane is working with the school. Yes, sorry about that, Laura. So we can go to the next slide. What you see here are the expectations that have been conveyed to the cohort 1 schools. As the board recalls, the superintendent has a goal around an annual goal around the work that's going to be done in these schools and setting non-negotiable expectations. So in terms of data-driven instruction, MTSS years 1 and 2, what you see here, I won't read the slide to you, and standards-based instruction. The first expectation that you see here for schools in cohort 1 to get to core implementation of data-driven instruction by spring of 2025 is unique to the cohort 1 schools. We've also conveyed to all non-charter schools the expectation to be moving along in MTSS implementation, which we have built an infrastructure around. We'll talk to you more about that next time we're together. And the expectation for all schools is also to provide standards-based instruction for all students in every school. And so let's move to the next slide. We're not going to go deep into the data-driven instruction implementation, but Chris is going to walk you kind of over a overarching understanding of it.
Yeah, this is also a follow-up to the last time that we met. And I wanted to just outline kind of the key sections within that DDI implementation rubric that was shared with all of you again. It's broken down into culture, assessment, analysis, and action. And you'll see that we were really intentional with the language within each of those categories of foundational, core, and deep, and how school may progress through foundational into core, and then potentially even into deep implementation. Those 4 categories, culture is around the establishment of a leadership team, the understanding of the why the work is taking place, the schedules that are in place to support the work, the PD that building leaders are making time for with their staff in order to make sure that DDI can be successful, the assessments that there are standards aligned, that they're planning with the end in mind, so with the assessment in hand as they have those conversations around what the end goals are with students. Then the analysis, so analyzing the mastery of the standard, and then identifying opportunities to reteach based on the mastery and the progress of students are making towards mastery of the standard. And then action, which is the teachers use that discussion, use the outcomes from that meeting to inform their next step with students and how they're going to reteach and provide those right instructional strategies for students as they move forward. I just wanted to highlight that based off of the conversation that we had last time together. So you guys had a really strong understanding of the purpose of that implementation rubric and how it's being used. Part of the intense support that our strategic plans support teams, cohort 1 schools are benefiting from is being able to have that companion guide alongside with this data-driven instruction implementation guide, which is identifying opportunities, resources that support how they can improve within each of these areas. So no matter where a school is on on DDI implementation, we're helping to identify areas so that they can improve within that implementation. So very excited about the work that's done from that so far with the team.
Wasn't sure if we want to pause here for conversation. We're also going to be giving an opportunity for a question and answer session with Chris and Joel. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Before we transition over to Chris Fiddler and Joel, I want to share that we, at our last meeting with the cohort 1 principals, this is just a bit of the feedback that they gave us. They really feel like the strategic plan support teams are helping them to pick up the pace of the important work. It's been very helpful to have 90-day plans and help with their UIP and the thought partnership for clarity of goals and systems, really empowering to have the instructional coach with their team. Principals indicated that this validates the work that they're doing as well as gives them thought partners and a chance to dig into and go deeper into data-driven instruction and reteaching and to move at a faster pace. And I want to let the board know also that we'll begin engaging with the cohort 2 schools during spring semester. And then during the Summer Leadership Academy, they're going to have an extended opportunity work session to begin building their 90-day plan. So they're going to have more of a head start than the schools that we're working with in cohort 1. We've really been building that infrastructure this year so we can anticipate what we're going to need to do to hit the ground running with cohort 2. And then all schools in cohort 1 will continue to have a light touch to continue building that capacity for sustainable change throughout next year. And some of those schools are in a state where they'll be ready to be mentor schools for the schools coming up in the next cohorts. So that's a great segue, I believe, to Joel and Chris. And I want to just open it up to any questions that the board may have for Joel and Chris. And if you don't have questions, they can certainly describe the work they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that presentation, Dr. De La Cruz. Board members, any questions? I have one question. Can you explain a little bit how the support you're providing school administrators is similar to or different than the support you're providing teachers, and who is responsible primarily for training up school principals?
We can do that together. Good morning, Madam President, board members. Good to see you this morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. So it's structured in such a way that Joel and I provide mentorship and coaching to the principals, and then the specialists are doing the heavy lifting around coaching teachers and leading the DDI conversations, helping plan those activities. We're doing a couple coaching cycles at Aspen Creek. So again, the structure is Joel and I mentor the principals, and then the specialists really take on that work in the buildings.
And then a follow-up to that, as new staff happen to matriculate into schools, say next year, there's new hires, staffing changes from the cohort 1, whose responsibility, how do those new teachers that haven't engaged in the work in the previous year come up to speed?
I mean, that is part of our work there, is like the sustainability of it. Luckily with the DDI implementation rubric, MTS implementation rubric, I mean, there's a clear guide for principals now. So like shout out to Nativity and Shannon and their team for putting that, because it's really allowed us to zero in on what are the systems that need to happen so that it can continue. And if you look at the DDI implementation rubric, one of those things is ongoing professional development with the strategies that, that we're putting in place through the 90-day plans right now. And those systems do continue, and it happened with all of our UVA schools in particular, that training that happens, because, the turnover that happens there is it does make an impact. So you have to consider that when you come back to school and have that. But if the systems are strong, the systems are in place, the leadership team's on board, the leaders are on board, then that preparation happens starting right now. I mean, we're having those conversations, talking about the spring 90-day plans. It's like, how do we sustain this work? This is just a big one for us moving forward with the course. And like Laura said, we're going to have, a light touch with those schools to continue that. But hopefully the leaders take that on as we move forward.
Alex?
Yeah, when you think about trying to get the schools moving along on this, what are some of the obstacles? And the follow-up question is there anything we as a district could do that would make it easier for the schools to make this progress? Like, what's the big thing that makes this hard, and what do you wish you had to make it go better?
I mean, for me, what I've seen, this year with the 5 schools, and I would imagine I can speak for Chris as well, and then also in the past, I mean, time is just always a concern. Like, it's a question of like, how do you build this in with the schedule? The infrastructure that's set, like, what does that calendar look like? What are the meetings? What are the minutes we have to meet with the particular curriculums? How do we fit that in? Where does it happen? It's always a conversation we have is like, how can we do this effectively with the staff? But guiding them through the leadership team to make those decisions together, you can find that opportunity within your schedule to make it happen, because we've seen it already.
And if I could add, just a celebration. So, these 10 schools were notified in August. And I'm sure they're all performance schools, a very different mindset than some of the schools where you had UVA in, had more intense support. The principals should be commended for the way they've embraced the process. They've been wonderful to work with. And if I can, you all should be commended for chasing this for all kids. Given the success that Boulder Valley has had globally in the aggregate, you should all just, as a prior superintendent, looking into Boulder Valley for many years, you should be commended for the way that you're chasing this work for all kids. And then Joel hit the nail on the head for me. So one of the resources that we all share is time, and it's Boulder Valley has the same amount of time as everybody else does to try to get this work done. But as far as challenges, if I'm honest, I was apprehensive about how the principals would receive us, but they've been, to a person, fantastic to work with. And you should expect that in terms of their care for all kids. So they're committed for that. Other obstacles, getting a head start as we head into cohort 2, so people can prepare to do some of that planning as they head into the school year. That'll be beneficial as we get into the next cohort.
Board members, any other questions? Dr. Anderson?
Just want to take a moment and say how proud I am of our team. And I really appreciate our principals, our teachers for embracing these ideas. I appreciate Laura, Chris, Jonathan, Joel, Chris as well. We're on the brink of something special. Again, we're coming off the best year that I think academically in many ways as a district we've ever had. And we're continuing to improve, push, get better. Our people are embracing it because I think all of us know and understand that we won't have arrived until every kid gets what they need out of our school district. And so I'm just really proud to be in a place that not only says that, but does the work to make that happen. And so I'm just really, really excited about our teams, about the work we're doing, about the consistency, the best practice, the progress that we're making, and the critical eye this board is having on this work to make sure that we have the resources and that there's the appropriate level of accountability to get to where we want to be.
Seeing as there are no further questions, I'd like to thank the entire strategic support team for being here today and for your tireless efforts to help our staff do what's best for kids. With that, we'll move moving on to our next item on the agenda this morning, which is policy action items. The first action item the board will be taking is on board policy AN, neurodiversity. Kathleen, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Board President Rajpal. We are finally here today. As the board knows, our community began work on this neurodiversity policy, oh my goodness, many, many, many months ago. What is returned for the board for action today reflects not just the great work of the many parents and participants in the Autism Advisory Council, but we also received a significant amount of feedback from teachers, from community members. So the board had studied this policy in June. We published a updated red line version that was rolled out to the community for additional feedback. We did have 26 comments that were submitted through that process. The policy was also posted on the board's website with a feedback form made available. Really, the takeaways from that feedback, and they are attached to the board agenda item. The takeaway on that feedback is that we really had a lot of interest in returning some of the language from the original draft. So the draft that's provided to the board tonight is the language from June that has been now updated to reflect that input. We also changed some grammar. Board Member Sargent, you'll be glad to know there was some feedback about the grammar of this particular policy to use an active voice to make sure that we weren't doing things to people and we were being very specific. I really want to thank a number of people in our community that provided invaluable input. I will come up short if I try to name everybody, but I know that Jenny is in the room. I apologize, I didn't have my glasses on to see you earlier. Nice to see you. But a lot of really important feedback from many across our community. So this policy is now presented to the board for action.
Board members, do we have a motion? Moved by Beth. Do we have a second? Seconded by Jason. Any discussion, board members? Jason, then Alex.
I don't have a whole lot more to add to what Kathleen already added. I'm just really grateful to be here, and thanks to all the folks in the community who've led on this, and just proud to be part of this district. Another example of us leading and innovating, when it comes to policy for what's best for kids. So thanks for your work on that. Thanks to all the advocates and parents, and just glad to be to this point.
Alex, and then Beth.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the thanks to the community for all the input on this and to the patience of everyone involved. I just also want to add thanks to Kathleen and the staff. I think the nuance and attention and trying to figure out how to address all that input was done really very thoughtfully. And I like where we have landed in a way that I believe will be supportive of everybody in our community. And also, I look forward to eventually understanding what the changes are in our schools for our kids that come out of this. I think a bunch of the feedback focused on, well, what happens when you do X? What does this mean? And I think as a policy document, this is at the right level of specificity. And I just know that I look forward to the same community that gave us feedback, continuing to partner with us as schools figure out what to change in their practices and what we need to change in our support structure to make it all work. So I'm very excited about the extra time we took to get the input. I think we've got it to a good place, and I'm very thankful for the community and our staff for getting us here.
Always the problem with going last on this, but I feel the exact same way. I am so grateful for the work on this. I can recall about a year ago conversations with Jenny and other community members around this exact topic. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart with my background in special education and working with the neurodiverse communities across my career and as a parent. So I'm really proud of the work we've done here. And thank you, Kathleen, and to your team for this. I think this is, as Jason used, innovative work. And so it makes me proud to be part of a district that's keeping this at the forefront. And it's similar to what Alex said. I too am looking forward to seeing what changes and what things come from this, because I think some good stuff will happen. So keep the communication cycle coming. Thank you so much.
Doesn't look like there are any other comments. So Laura, can you please call the vote?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Owaida,
Yes.
Raj Paul,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Board members, our next item on policy action today is the revision and recoding of policy IGDA to policy JJA. Do we have a motion? Moved by Kitty, seconded by Jason. Any discussion on this, board members? I'm very excited to be able to eliminate a few exhibits and regulation as we continue the really important work of managing our policies. Having a manageable number is part of that. So thank you for all of your hard work on this policy, Kathleen. And then I'll turn it over to Kitty.
So I just have a couple of questions. I mean, I think I know the answers to them, but so if we have a student-led group, they are responsible for finding an adult to supervise them. Is that correct? But not to participate.
Yes, Board Member Sargent, you're identifying the law that applies to our secondary students when we're looking at their ability as they are becoming closer to adults and exercising their democratic rights, that they have the ability at that high school level to form student-led groups. And in that case, they're governed by the Equal Access Act. So the technical details of how they come up with a supervisor and that work is done at the school level. But you're correct that when it's a student-led organization, the adult can only be there for that supervision and safety element. They can't actively lead that group, control what the students do, or otherwise really direct the group.
And I did notice that it said if it's a group that has a religious purpose, that the adult who's supervising can't participate even if they also practice that same religion.
That's correct. Nor can a outside community member
Right.
regularly attend or otherwise significantly influence or direct the scope of that group.
And I know it also talks about, you can't have negative behavior coming out of the student, well, any of the groups, but it would be more likely out of a student-led group. And that's, do we know what the schools are doing to monitor that? And there's a reason I'm asking this, is it because, and this was back long ago, my daughter was bullied by members of a student-led group. And so I'm not suggesting that schools are allowing it, but I'm just wondering what sorts of things are in place.
Thank you for the reminder about bullying. I think anytime we talk about that topic, we want to make sure that our community knows that they can make a report on their school or the BVSD website. Certainly, it's our expectations, and I think one of the reasons that we really allow student groups to be formed at the high school level is all of our expectations around the student code of conduct would apply because they are in a school activity, even if it is a student-led activity. So we expect that same supervision across these activities and the same reporting structures where we are relying on our students and our staff members to let us know immediately if there's any conduct of concern so that we can respond.
Alex and then Jason.
Yeah, I just want to, Kathleen, thank you again. This looks really strong. For big picture, this updates us to recent litigation in Supreme Court cases, right? So this puts us aligned with what would be modern jurisprudence on these sorts of issues, right? That's my assumption.
Yes, that's correct. We hadn't reviewed this policy since 2003, so we had about 20 years of experience and jurisprudence to consider.
I may have missed an earlier discussion on this, but on page 2, the third item here, participation in the group is required for a particular course. Can you give us an example of something that's required, an outside group that is required for any course? And that seems, I don't know the law around this, but that does seem inappropriate for us to require participation in a group for a course.
So this is part of that body of case law that really distinguishes between student-led and school-sponsored academic organizations. The intent of this section is really, I think, to give principals a clear way to distinguish between the types of groups that are being formed. Like everything else, we have to be really clear on what the identity is and the purpose in order to make sure that we're applying the proper procedures. So this is intended perhaps to cover something like, I'm thinking about DECA, but that's in another example. Participation in the group is required for a particular course. I'm looking for my high school principals in the room.
There's, wind ensemble. I think that there's maybe some potential performing arts, marching band but there's, as a parent of a band kid, there are things that part of my son's grade is part of going to the Pops concert. And there's other performances because the band can't participate if everybody doesn't show up and it's optional in these types of events.
Katie?
So I have a follow-up question on that. So, because my kids were in performing arts as well. So that's considered a group or an a school-sponsored academic organization instead of just part of the class?
It can be, and some of that would come down to the course description itself and the activity itself. On this policy on page 1 does bring together the school-sponsored activities that would include, as Dr. Anderson mentioned, choir or newspaper. I think we saw our amazing students at the honor roll last week. So some of these activities go beyond the scope of what you can cover in an ordinary class, and that might be when there's a related organizational piece.
Jason?
So just to that, on that, would it make sense then to say it's required for a particular course as written in the course description? I just feel maybe just some clarity there around, obviously there's a great examples of what would include that, but I feel like needs some added language here to make it clear, like, it's spelled out ahead of time, the kids have to go to these concerts or do X, Y, or Z as part of this course. And I don't feel like that language is clear, maybe just to me, I don't know, but it looks like it's an additional requirement. But I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know.
I think that'd be fine, honestly. And I do think it's important when we make commitments that we're signing up for to really understand what the commitments are.
And I know not all of our board members have kids in high schools yet, but they do make that abundantly clear when you are in those classes. Like if you want honors, well, you're in a certain program, there's an expectation, or they do make it abundantly clear to folks. So I will just add that out. If you don't have a high schooler yet, it might feel fuzzy, but it's not quite so fuzzy in practice. So as a practical matter, we have a motion. Do we need to make an amendment to this to continue to approve it? Amend?
Yes, if the board wanted to accept that, what we've done in the past procedurally is if there's just a small language change, we've added that to the motion, voted on amending the motion, and then voted on the original.
So Jason, since you put that forward, I would encourage you to make that motion. And whether you want to give specific language or leave it to the discretion of Kathleen is your call.
All right, so I make a motion to approve this policy with
You have to move an amendment.
to amend this policy based on, just give Kathleen the authority to improve it based on our conversation. It's totally not clear, but.
So you're moving to amend the motion to add language to that bullet point 3 at my discretion to address the requirements for outside participation be included in the course catalog or descriptions.
That sounds right.
Yeah, it wasn't that much better, but I made a go at it, yeah.
Is there a second? Seconded by Beth. Board members, any further discussion on this item? Laura, can you please call the vote on the amendment put forward by Board Member Unger?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler, Niznik.
Yes.
Yes. Quinlan Oeda,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So the motion on the floor is to approve this policy as reflected in the amendment language that was just passed. We don't need another motion because that's already happened, but board members, is there any further discussion before we call the roll? Seeing as there are none, Laura, can you please call the vote on this policy?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oeda,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our final action item today is the retirement of policies IGDA-R, IGDA-E1, IGDA-E2, IGDA-E3. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Kitty, seconded by Beth. Board members, any discussion on the retirement of these 4 policies? Seeing as there are none, Laura, can you please call the vote?
Chavez,
Yes.
Medler,
Yes.
Niznik,
Yes.
Quinlan Oeda,
Yes.
Rajpal,
Yes.
Sergeant,
Yes.
Unger.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Our final item today is a policy study item. We have Board Policy BDFC Athletic Review Committee, and I will hand it over to Kathleen.
Thank you. So this board policy we are bringing forward, as we do with policies that we know just as a time we need to clean up, even if they haven't been included as a specific priority for the semester. This will be a new policy, and it follows the board's attention to its advisory committees from January of last year. The board will remember you revised all of your B policies. At that point, we updated the umbrella policy around advisory committees, which is board policy BDF. In 2017, the board had formed the athletic review committee, but we never had the adopted written policy that serves as the board's charge for this committee. So this item's presented to you on study tonight. The content of this policy aligns with all of the board's other advisory committees. So we have BDF, which is your umbrella policy, and then I think we have 7 advisory committees, the Personnel Performance Evaluation Council, the Career and Tech Advisory Council, the District Drug Abuse Education and Prevention Council, Community Bond Oversight, and Long Range Advisory Committee. So this will join those other board advisory committees, and some of the language has been proposed through the work of the Athletic Review Committee, who has proposed a purpose. We've identified the committee responsibilities and the membership. And then, like I said, align the appointment process, the meeting structure, and recommendations to be consistent with board policy BDF.
Board members, any questions or discussion? Lelania.
I might suggest on our committee responsibilities there, I think it could be cleaner. Probably bullets 5 and 6 with the addition of a couple of words to bullet 1 could just be more concise. Bullet 1, you could just add teamwork and leadership. And I'm not sure if there's anything else that is encompassed there. I guess maybe increasing participation, but I think that's already covered. So I think cleaning that up would be good. The other place that I'd like us to be really clear is we'll know our Title IX regs will change, and our Board of Education policies will probably be the policies that will be the more informative if we get Title IX regs from the next administration. So do we need to say something in this that says that we will go to the highest and best policy when looking at that, Kathleen? That's just a question, how we word that on bullet number 2.
Yes, I think you're reflecting the tension that a lot of school districts, I think, and public agencies are feeling. I do agree with you. I think it makes sense to specifically reference Title IX here, and also to have some language about the committee's responsibility to stay current and make sure that we're engaging in those important updates.
Kind of along some of Lelania's feedback, it seems like the bulk of this probably came from the board athletic review committee itself and its establishment documents. I feel like some of the language isn't quite aligned with how our policy language reads and could use some cleanup. Even thinking about like the purposes and quotes, I just think that there could be some improvements there. And it is hard in retrospect, not having a policy that governs a group that was established in 2017 to kind of do that look back and yet think about present day concerns and needs in this policy. So I haven't really known how to wrap my brain around some feedback. I'll give it some more thought, but I think looking at it through the lens of more of our other policy and how the language could be made more concise and clear, so our general public that's not part of athletic review committee understands. I also, with the membership part, I'm just wondering how currently our community member matriculated up. There hasn't been for a while, to my best of my knowledge, an open call for participation in this community or committee, sorry. And so how that comes into play, and how even just the language around the membership diversity, just some questions on how that is happening in practice, that committee is reflective and can understand the degree to which they do reflect and understand diverse perspectives around that membership component. Yeah,
We actually have 2 community members now.
Oh,
And so if we want to, let's put 2, but we have to.
And certainly the membership, this is a board advisory council, so this is at the board's discretion. I did originally pull some of the language by modeling our LRAC committee, and those committees are much larger. I mean, they're suggesting that they're, up to 30 people and including quite a diversity of.
and I can understand the point to which like a committee is so big, depending on its task at hand, it might be ineffective. But so I think hearing that this doesn't entirely reflect current practice allows us a little bit more opportunity to think through what the board expectations or desires are for this committee. Alex has his hand up, and then it was Kitty.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be up for making any changes that the committee would like us to make, and understanding if they have any proposed changes. So I'm assuming as this comes to us that we don't really have any additional changes that the committee itself would propose. That's one point. Number 2, I would think on the membership, Certainly we should reflect current practice, and having additional community voice seems like a net win to me, using sports analogy for it. And then I guess I'm curious, maybe if there's any current overlap between our Title IX advisory group and this. And I might be interested in suggesting that we have a designated member of this group that is a member of the Title IX group to ensure that there is cross understanding between the two groups, and also some sense of roles as it goes forward.
Can I ask a question on that? How has that worked in practice when we have because the Title IX Advisory Committee is actually a superintendent advisory committee. It's not a board advisory committee. And so how has that worked in practice in other situations where the different committees are established to advise entirely different groups of individuals, board versus superintendent?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of whether it's happened at all, honestly. I do think that it's a topic of conversation for the Title IX Advisory Council as to how they are able to interface with other organizations within our district. And on the Title IX Staff Advisory Council, that's a meeting that I attend and lead with community partners, all of those meetings. So there's certainly crossover between staff. Currently, we also have board members participating on our Title IX Council who also participates with the Athletic Review Committee, and that's board member Quinlan Ueda. I don't know if you'd like to weigh in on this topic. I do think that it's our obligation as staff, when we are charged with oversight or leadership responsibilities around Title IX, to make sure that we are occupying the spaces where those conversations are happening, and that we're connecting that feedback so that we can bring Dr. Anderson and the board coherent recommendations and perspectives on how things are currently operating.
I think it's a great idea, Alex, and I wonder, because you may not always have a board member doing both of those, if you put one person from, I guess it just depends on I'm going to think on it. I'm actually not going to make any suggestion here that I think we should put until I think on it more.
Kitty and then Jorge.
So my suggestion, if we wanted to change this to address diversity issues, is to either say, ARC is comprised of staff and voluntary members of BVSD community, including but not limited to, or where it says one community member, put at least one community member. And then that both of those would leave it flexible.
Dr. Anderson and then Jorge.
I think this committee is interesting. It was formulated in the interim while we had an interim superintendent before my arrival. I guess the question that I'd have is should this be a board committee or should it be a superintendent committee? So certainly. So this is so committees that I would put together would advise me to make recommendations, right? And board committees would advise the board on making board decisions. It's fine if this stays a board committee, it's fine. I think anyone who's advising us, right, to what extent, I mean, you'd have to go back to the history on why this thing was formed at that point in time in the history of the district. But to what extent is the board or athletic decisions coming to the board for anything? So, I do think that you have to, that there are things that come up in athletics, especially high school athletics, that get squirrely and need attention and need folks to come together and figure out. The question for you all to complicate, I'm good either way. It just feels like it's it was a committee that was maybe built at a time when maybe there wasn't an appetite for a superintendent to pull together a committee, and so the board pulled together a committee. But I wasn't here. But in any event, to the extent if the board were to say this should be a superintendent's committee, we would certainly, I would embrace that, and we would staff that and make that happen. Or it can stay as a board committee. I just don't know what decisions, why it sits as a board committee, I think is a question.
I actually think that's a really good point, and part of us bringing forth this policy is because it's been referred to as a board committee, and I felt a high degree of discomfort. I mean, even they presented at CASB that it's a board advisory committee, and I felt discomfort that we have an advisory committee that is not codified in policy. So that is how this policy came forth, is because it's always been referred to and because board members sit on it. Now, typically board members do not sit on superintendent advisory committees. We can attend, but we aren't active members. And so I think that could be, a potential point of discussion as well. Jumping on this, and sorry, Jorge, I actually don't think that there's a lot of reason for this to come to the board. I think the board members, because this is particularly high schools, not our board members don't all know exactly the nuance of this very specific number of schools. So I could see it being a superintendent's advisory committee. And I think I would be open to entertaining that, at which case we would not need a policy at all, but we would have to rethink a little bit then. I would just be wondering, because I don't want to also set precedent for board members are not appointed to and do not sit on superintendent advisory committees. We can show up, we can show up to youth equity council meetings, we can show up to CAPL meetings, but we aren't active members. And so that's the one nuance I would just want to figure out. Elenia, and then I know, Jorge, I'm still coming back to you.
Given that nuance, I would like it to stay. I don't want it to be a superintendent. I think that the participation of board members prior to me has been very important to that. Stacy's participation was very important to that committee. Well, it remains to be seen if my participation is important, but I do definitely know Stacy's was. And I will say that the only thing that in my 1 year of sitting there that I've seen a vote on, and I don't know if it was a straw poll, I don't really remember, was waivers. And that never seemed to get to the board. Not only did the recommendation not get here, I don't think any of the information got here. So if it is going to be a board committee, then perhaps we should be receiving a report.
Oh, yeah, let Jorge, sorry.
Dr. Anderson, Kitty, is your question the same? Is it relevant to this conversation?
Yes.
Then I'll go Dr. Anderson, Kitty, and Jorge, when this conversation is.
I'm just thinking of the logistics of this, right? So if that committee makes a recommendation to the board on something I disagree with, I mean, because ultimately they're making decisions that are going to impact budget, they're going to impact personnel, they're going to impact certification, they're going to impact sports. Like we can try to figure out a way where there's a consistent board liaison. I know that that's kind of been the way that it's been, but if the athletic review committee is wrestling with a topic and they're not making the progress that we would hope that they're making, or they're recommending things, they're not advising with me, or we have a representative here. It just feels like you could get recommendations from a board advisory committee that wouldn't align with the superintendent's recommendation. So or maybe it would, I couldn't tell you. I mean, ultimately, I think that is, if we're going to start to try to tackle things in regards to athletics and makes changes, that then your expectation as your lone employee would be to implement these changes. It feels just like there's some things that are out of sorts in terms of the ability to know and understand what's happening there, or being having a superintendent or the superintendent's designee leading that committee. Even though I know Harry does lead the committee a little bit, but it's a board committee as well. Like it's not a chair and co-chair that are voted on. It's staff that's leading the board committee. There's just a lot of things that I think that I'd want to think about what do we want this committee to do, and then how do we structure it in a way so the board has the right insight. Board involvement can become important in terms of board policy that might have to change, or budget. Like, I think that there's a place there. If they were to, there's a very good chance they could recommend something like the way, like, you know, they're wrestling something and they may or may not know and understand the space that they have to make a decision. And if it's a board committee, it's more like a kind of a vote versus a superintendent's committee. They could give feedback, then I bring recommendations.
And just thinking about that too, our checks and balances are our policies, and think of the volume of policy we have around athletics that we're currently studying, or Title IX, so if you have those checks and balances in place, I think there could be an inherent conflict if they're advising us and then we're also implementing policy without it having to go through the alternate channel. Kitty, Alex, Jorge.
So I didn't realize that any board member on a committee actually participated, that we go in order to just be there to liaise back and forth. So this would sit outside of what board members do in other committees. And considering that they don't bring us anything that we need to vote on, it does seem to me we don't need them as a board committee. And it seems to me as board committees, we need everything that's required by law, and then committees that the board decides, and again, nobody here was on the board then, we want them to advise us on a decision we are going to make, like the long-range planning committee. And we don't make decisions on athletic stuff. And it's, except for the now 2 community members, it's all staff and a board member. So I would definitely be in favor of making this the superintendent's committee.
Alex, Jorge, and then Beth.
Yeah, I'm with Lenny on this one. I was around in the district and had kids in high school when this was created, and I'm familiar with some of the circumstances that were going on and the pressure from the community and the board in order to deal with some issues. So I support Lenny on this one. I really do believe the integration between the Title IX Advisory Committee and this committee is key, because some of the things we're actually trying to address in our athletics involve inclusion and creating safe places for all our students. And I believe we just enacted a policy that had Title IX implications that would have implications for athletics as well. So I don't understand that these would be things the board doesn't act on. I look forward to acting on things that would influence athletics like any other activity. So I'm in favor of maintaining it where board members serve on it. I would point out that when the board liaisons go to DAC, they do give a report, but they engage in feedback with them. And then ideally they sit down at the table and figure out what's being talked about in the work groups of the DAC, for example. So I'm not in favor of instituting anything that isolates the board members from our committees in our community. And I think that we can juggle the multiple hats that go on. I think Lileni has done well. I think Stacy did a great job. So I have no evidence that Stacy failed in her role while being on that committee, while it was being more ad hoc. And I don't have any evidence that Lileni's involvement in the Title IX and the athletic committee has been problematic for us. So I think changing it to make it a superintendent's thing is unnecessary, and I'm in support of keeping it there. And I'm in support of expanding people from the community so that we could get some more diversity in there, so that if people from the community have things that they'd like to see changed, that they'd have more voice at it. And I'm confident that all of them will be adequately staffed, and that eventually things would percolate up that the superintendent would be able to act on, and that the board would be informed by. So that's where I'm coming from.
No, I appreciate the discussion, because I wasn't really clear on the role of this committee and what it was doing and how it fit within the current structures. So I was appreciating the back and forth to try to get a sense of kind of where we're at with it. And and the fact that we hadn't had a report from that committee if it was an advisory committee to the board, because I was a little confused about what this committee does and its role and where it fits. And so I'm still kind of trying to process that part of it in terms of where it makes sense and what role it serves. But as far as if they are going to be community members, then they are going to be addressing things like diversity, representing the community, then having more than one makes a lot of sense. And thinking about, depending on where it fits, maybe longer than 1 year terms. I don't know what the startup is in terms of like ability to kind of jump right into the conversations for community members with this sort of committee. So if it might make sense to have like 2-year terms and have some kind of rotation. But the bigger issue is figuring out where this committee should fall and what issues it's addressing, in my mind.
Similar to what you just said, Jorge, I appreciate this conversation. Although I've almost lost all of my thoughts because it's like you have to keep it all in your head. Initially, I really wanted to hear from Melania because, of course, you're the one that's living it, experiencing it, and I think it's a huge asset that we have you. We happen to have you on both the Title IX and the Athletic Review Committee, but that may not always be the case. What I heard Kathleen say earlier is that that information flows through staff, not through community and or board members, correct? So I would want to find a way to keep that information flow codified and solidified for us, because I think that's extremely important that Title IX and Athletic Review Committee be talking to each other. So I think that's point one for me. I think we're fortunate to have Melania in that role right now, but we may not always have that. Point two is, I think Rob made a lot of excellent points in saying the history of this committee. I have never, to be honest, really been clear on why the Athletic Review Committee is a board committee. I didn't know. I think you've done a great job. I think Stacy did a great job. I think I would be leaning towards having it be a superintendent's committee because I hear Alex's concerns of, I forget the word you used, but it was kind of feeling like that we are frozen out or left out of the conversation. I would not want that to happen either. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a superintendent's committee, we can always attend at any time. There's just not the same level of obligation to report back to the board or act on information in the same way. Is that correct? Like we wouldn't be frozen out of it because that is really, really important as well.
Just want to be clear. I'm never freezing any of you all out of anything. Let's just be clear to the public. I know that you all know that. That is not how we operate. We work as a team. I just think that, and I'm happy to do whatever the board wants to do. Like, look, this is how this committee's gone for 6.5 years, no issue. To the extent that they've made the progress that we would have hoped or some would have hoped. I mean, maybe not. I think you've got a committee that's made up of mostly staff members with one board member in there that is serving as a board committee, with a committee that has decided by and on themselves on what they're going to work on and do. If this wants to stay as a board committee, I rose the question because the reality would be is as a board, if you have a challenge or you want something to change or improve with athletics, you would make that a goal of the superintendent. Right. And then as the superintendent, then what I would do, I would be responsible to listen to people and then potentially take that advice or not and make decisions to move things in different directions. But maybe I'm good either way. I think that we can continue to have the committee. I think Stacy's done a great job. I think Elenia's done a great job. This is in no way, shape, or form saying that that board members haven't done a good job. I think that you have, right? But the question becomes the dynamics of the committee and the change or improvements. If that's the goal of the committee, then those would come through me anyways. You would say, Rob, why haven't you improved this? And I would say, well, board, this is your committee. I would say but like I said, I'm good either way.
Yeah. One thought, then Jason, then Alex. The other thing I'm thinking about a little bit is because most of the board advisory committees, there are not so many staff members that directly impact an individual student's existence at their individual school. So you have the district accountability committee has district staff that oversee that. It's not a high school principal that oversees that. LRAC, it's district staff. It's not. So I could see a situation in which individual parents might have individual concerns or struggles at individual schools with individual leaders, and that might become a challenging dynamic in a way that our other board committees, that isn't the case, because I don't have my athletic director that I have an issue with. I don't have that direct access to as a community member. So I think the structure, thinking through that, for me is important. And I would hate for anybody to end up on any of our committees because they feel like they can directly make somebody's life challenging on a regular cadence. Jason, and then Alex.
Kind of to your point, Nicole and Dr. Anderson, you mentioned that this is heavily staffed, and I just want to bring it back to that part of it. I don't know what structure makes sense, whether a superintendent or a board committee. It seems like it's working well. It doesn't seem like there's a reason to change the existing structure. But I look at this list and I see it's heavily weighted towards high school interests and athletic interests, and whether it's one or two community members, that does not seem to, in the following sentence, understand diverse perspectives. And I think we really need to focus on the membership and not so much, maybe we just have a handful of principals and athletic directors and have a broader representation that's not so much in the interest, whether, to Nicole's point about people using this for their interests or for a particular goal. That's the concern here, is that this is heavily weighted towards what is in the best interest of high schools and athletics. And that's one perspective. It's not the perspective of what I think a review committee should be.
Alex and Elenia. You're muted, Alex.
Sorry, can you hear me? I agree with what Jason just said. I believe expanding community involvement might be good. It depends on what kind of issues that have evolved. I would make the distinction between, it's one thing to be liaising to a group and be in the room, and it's another to be part of the group. And I think there's a utility to having the board member be part of the group and able to be actually to engage. And I think that will deepen the board member's understanding of what's going on in a way that just observing can't. So I think I support them being a member. I think we can handle the subtlety. We've handled the subtlety apparently for 7 years without really being a problem. And at the same time, figure out a way to diversify the participation. Ultimately, my goal is to influence our athletic programs in a way that lead to more kids participating and enjoying it and having safe and fun and growing experiences. And I believe diversity from the community might help us move in that direction. And I think involvement of a board member deepens our understanding and insight into it in a way that we wouldn't get otherwise. In the meantime, I don't think the current governance flow chart of it has been problematic, so I don't see a reason to change it.
I might suggest, the way that I perceive it has operated, because it is so heavily staff-oriented, is it almost operates like a staff meeting. And if we had more community membership, we actually could have more of an LRAC feel where there would be some reporting back. And that would be one option, to send it toward more of an LRAC feel, but then it would operate less as a staff meeting. And I am glad to liaise or participate. I will do either of those happily. But I do really hear what you're saying, Rob, that I don't think that this committee has come forward with a recommendation to the board. I would be glad to come to you with my report from going, but that's not the same. That's not what LRAC's doing. LRAC is a community that is coming to us with recommendations. So I think it's just existed in kind of no man's land or no woman's land, Title IX compliant. But I think it probably is ineffective the way it is now. I will say that.
So what this brings up for me is the board deciding what we need any committee to do. Are they going to exist because the board needs to make a decision about something or for a different purpose. And if it's not, if the raison d'etre isn't to advise the board on decisions the board typically makes, because this isn't on anything we typically make decisions on. That doesn't mean this committee shouldn't exist, but then you look at where does it sit? And what is the purpose of it? And it could be, since nobody here knows, maybe some staff folks know why it was convened in the first place. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Well, anyway, if Alex, if you were in on those conversations, that would be good for us to hear at some point. But maybe it's a chance to think, okay, here's a committee. What do we want them to do? Do we want to change what their mission is? And then decide where does it sit? But I think if it's not reporting to the board for the purpose of us making a decision, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from them, but then they don't need to be part of the formal structure of advising the board, which means if it wants to change up, they want to change up, or we want them to change up, we don't have to have a policy change in order to do that. And it gives, I think, a lot more flexibility. But I think this is an opportunity for us to say, is this, do we want this group to do what, I don't even know exactly what it is you are doing, or is there something else? Or does the group want to say, here are some things we could do? But it looks like we have an opportunity to either remake or add to this group and have them do something that we all agree on is a meaningful thing for them to be doing.
I agree, Kitty. I think taking the time to really understand how this committee operates in current context and the value that they are providing to our school district as a whole is an important step, and we might need to pause and give a little bit more space for that. And I do think, I mean, for me personally, sitting here today, it feels like more of equity committee where they do come and present on updates in the work, but we're not necessarily, it's not work that we're always voting on. And yeah, Equity Council is a superintendent's advisory committee. So just the way they operate at present, the way the way the board makes decisions and what the board makes decisions on, for me, that's kind of where I'm leaning. But I do think, and I don't know that it's the board's, it's entirely the board's responsibility to understand where this needs to go. I think giving staff some time to think about what is the goal and the purpose of this committee and how it can really make the biggest impact in the work that Superintendent Anderson knows the board is trying to accomplish, and that our current policy updates are clearly accomplishing. What is the purpose of this committee today and in the next decade? And so, looking at the clock again, I wonder if that is an opportunity just to give the staff some time to think about how might this operate best in the context of the district and the conversation we're having today. Lelania.
I agree that that needs to be something the staff digs into, because I don't think LRAC has community leaders. Am I correct? And this is led by staff, and it just does not lend itself to being much more than a staff meeting. And certainly I don't, and that's great. Every staff meetings need to occur, but I think it needs to have a specific charge, and then we need to have some community engagement. And once again, happy to just liaise whatever works, but I kind of do lean toward letting it be a superintendent committee.
Beth and then Alex.
This dovetails nicely with my question. So if it were a superintendent's committee, would we have a greater opportunity to solicit involvement from the community. I think it's something we keep kind of circling around and coming back to. Jason's point, Elenia's point. Can we get more community involvement if it's superintendent?
It just, I think that we have to ask ourselves, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Right? Is there a problem we're trying to solve with athletics? Are we just trying to get folks together to talk about the emerging things that are happening in athletics? Remember, CHASA dictates a lot of what we do with sports, right? It dictates a lot of what we're doing for sports. So if the board were to say to me, Rob, here's the problem we're trying to solve. We feel like the community should be more involved in how we structure and fund and support athletic programs, right? Then getting community input, you wouldn't have all the principals and ADs in the meeting, right? Like I don't typically go to board committee meetings because as soon as I show up, I'm the superintendent. Like it's a power dynamic. It defeats the dynamics of the purpose of what you're trying to do. And if I do show up to some committees like Equity Council or others, I'm there as a participant. I'm not there as a, because they have a chair and typically board committees have a chair and a co-chair. There's an election process. There's a way to say, how many people are we going to have in the community? What backgrounds are we trying to put together? And then what are the things that we're going to talk about? Does the committee get to drive the agenda or these are the, do you put that in the policy? These are the things that we'd want you to think about and consider. So it's one of those things. If the board would like to keep this as a board committee, if you feel like it's functioning in the ways that you would hope that it would, I would say that is great. If there are other things, though, that we're looking to deal with or figure out or understand or gain perspective, right, you would probably have to, think about, if it's a board committee, what does that look like? How do you want them to report back to you, right? If it's a superintendent's committee, what do I think that needs to look like? What information and advice do I need based on the direction the board has given me in regards to athletics, Title IX, what have you? So I just think that it's a little bit clunky. It was built during a clunky time for the district, if we're just being completely honest. And it feels like it was a board committee set up to be a superintendent's committee and a board's committee kind of name. That's what I mean. But again, I just share that as advising to you, knowing and understanding that we can make whatever you'd like to make work. But if you were trying to do some other things, Beth, I think you would, if we were doing this now, which we have a bit of an opportunity because it's not in board policy, right? This is how we would advise.
Alex and Elenia.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this conversation. This is helping me get a good understanding of what we have and where we're going. I think my initial reaction to thinking about this as a board committee is I do have an interest in our athletic programming and offerings being reflective of an inclusive approach and compliant with Title IX, but not just compliant, but also leveraging that to make a better experience for all our diverse students. So for me, Elenia happens to be the Venn diagram overlap in the circle between the person who's in the Title IX group and the person who's in this group. So if by becoming a superintendent's committee instead of board committee, we lost that overlap, I would be concerned. But I really like the direction of this discussion because I think it gives us an opportunity to say, hey, what's the purpose? How should it be structured? It makes a lot of sense if it's mostly all staff to have it be a superintendent committee for sure, and then figure out where the recommendations are coming from. I guess if we open up the discussion to like, what's the reason for this and how should it be structured to achieve that reason, then I think we can talk about more participation. But if we were to narrow the purpose and say, hey, this is to handle operational issues in the schools and create efficiencies by understanding across sports, then we don't really need to make it a big community-driven process if that's not the goal. So I don't believe that we make everything a community-driven process because that's always better. There's things that we need to efficiently operate. The superintendent can work with his principals and athletic directors to solve that we don't need to have everybody involved in. And then there's questions that are pretty fundamental and directional, where having more community and more nuance involved in the decision making makes sense. So I agree that I don't think we know where we're going yet. I would just state that I want to, if we have the opportunity, I want to make our athletics inclusive and I want to take care of all our Title IX concerns, and I want us to be smart about it. That's where I'm coming from. So I'm totally curious to see what we do next, and I really appreciate the discussion today.
I've flipped back and forth at least 3 times on this about what kind of committee I think it should be. What I do know is it's not, there is no clear mandate for it. And what I would like to do, and I think it would be in our best interest as a community that does value sports, but also really values equity. And we have a superintendent who embodies that consistently and knows that that is what we care about. I think we need to let staff dig in and figure out what the charge of this committee is and where it lands. And then we as a board can navigate that.
Board members, this is a study item, so there's no official vote, but there's a lot of head nodding in it, that is going to be the next best step.
Thank you so much for the discussion.
Well, that concludes our business for today, board members. And so with that, I motion to adjourn.